Okay, thank you all for coming. As you can see, I'm talking about this topic, or this is my title, Lucrative Chaos. Interesting. What's
It's the blood.
interesting topic as a function of economic normalisation. In the ancient world, all revolutionary movements had a single program: cancel the debts and redistribute the land. So says Moses Finley and David Graeber. And this quote from David Graeber's History of Debt draws attention to the link between economic disadvantage and popular protest. This is a core theme of my talk today, but it's not meant to suggest that debt and land dispossession are solely responsible for the repeated incidences of Uyghur Han violence in South Xinjiang or the ongoing interethnic tensions in the region. Restrictions on certain Uyghur religious, cultural and educational practices appear from reports since 2009 to be of at least equal importance in this respect. That said, land dispossession clearly plays a significant role as a catalyst for Uyghur protests in South Xinjiang. And Uyghur protests has led in many of the reported cases of violence since 2009 to interethnic violence. So for its part, debt is altogether more insidious. It affects elites as much as the poor, and the consequences of the various types of debt that I'll talk about today are potentially far more widespread. Moreover, debt and land dispossession are often intimately related. First, in rural areas, smallholder debt can lead to land dispossession and consequently a cycle of indebtedness that's extremely difficult to break free of. Second, in many cases it's debt-financed capital construction projects which produce the demand for the land in the first place, and the smallholder's separation from it. This process of what's called primitive accumulation by Marx is very much part of economic life in South Xinjiang. The third way in which debt and land dispossession are intimately related is that both individual and institutional debt, the debt held by people, individuals, and by the large institutions that structure Xinjiang society, like the Bingtuan, the oil company, these things, and the local governments, as well as land dispossession, are considered normal. They're quite normal phenomenon in eastern China and central China. Eastern and central China is called Neidi in Xinjiang. Lastly, both smallholder debt and land dispossession are examples of what I characterise as unfavourable social exclusion. Unfavourable social exclusion, I suggest, is an essential complement to the exclusionary factors put forward as explanations for social unrest by scholars who previously examined the relationship between economic transformation and interethnic conflict in Western China. Social inclusion and social exclusion are inseparable. I aim to show this by describing a lucrative and chaotic political economic space that gained prominence in Xinjiang in the early 2010 and has grown through that time since then. And that is since the ascension of Jiang Chunxian to be the Dangwei Shuji of Xinjiang and the beginning of the latest Assist Xinjiang project. Lucrative chaos in South Xinjiang is created by the interactions of mainly Han entrepreneurs and mainly Han government officials in the context of certain large-scale and highly uneven flows of capital. In this political economic space, the stakes are high and the investment horizon is short. Opportunities appear quickly and are likely to disappear just as quickly. The power to take advantage of these speculative business opportunities is held primarily by officials and their clients. For them, for some people at least, instability, chaos is not all bad. Instability is where the opportunity lies. Massive capital investment in this way is a form of rent paying by the centre to the lower levels of party and government. On the other hand, for unconnected people, including almost all the Uyghurs in South Xinjiang, this political economy is inclusive only in the sense that it's incursive. Large-scale infrastructure investments, inflation, webs of private finance and indebtedness, and subsidies to the cotton industry are all incursions into economic life in South Xinjiang. Collectively, these incursions change the nature and extent of social inclusion and social exclusion across the ethnic divide. What I'm saying here is that the changing and combination of particular types of social inclusion and social exclusion underlies a lot of the ethnic tension in Xinjiang at the moment. So now let me give you an idea of how I'm conceptualising Xinjiang here in relation to Neidi, because that's how the Han conceptualised Xinjiang, and I work within the Han community, not within the Uyghur community. Ethnic peripheries of the PRC are directly affected by ideas, policies and practices that occur in the Han dominated core, Nadi. One of the most pervasive influences on Xinjiang is the ongoing state project to integrate it into the core region. At the level of culture, society and microeconomics, where I work in the ethnographic region, I prefer to describe this integration as normalisation. In the Foucauldian sense, normalisation is the process of disciplining through the imposition of precise norms. Normalisation, in Xinjiang context, is the process of making Xinjiang more like Nadi, and especially people in Xinjiang more like people in Nadi. Normalisation includes bilingual education, restrictions on religious practice and teaching, civilization as a verb, the remaking of history and the reshaping of habits. An ironic precondition of a normalised Xinjiang is that during the process of normalisation, Xinjiang is not to be treated normally. Xinjiang is a special region with regard to which special policies are implemented and within which special time periods regularly pass. The way that the state and Han in Xinjiang talk about Xinjiang and policies towards Xinjiang reveals a deep-seated assumption that you have to treat it special to normalise it. Treating Xinjiang special in economic terms means massive injections of capital from the central government and the partner-level, provincial-level units in eastern China. This partnering arrangement is referred to in Chinese as duikao, and it involves pairing up provincial-level units, mainly provinces, in Nadi with prefectural or sub-prefectural units in Xinjiang. Along with direct government investment and capital construction, the Nadi partner brokers investment by companies which are mainly state-owned enterprises from its own region, provides training for government personnel from the Xinjiang side, and extends loans for these operations through banks based in Nadi, based in their own province. So, with regard to most of this duikao money, capital is debt. The training aspect can be seen as a form of cultural or intellectual debt. As you all know, most of the Assist Xinjiang efforts are focused on fixed capital investment, infrastructure projects like roads, bridges, railways, oil and gas pipelines. There's been plenty written about this. And coming from the CCP side, publications emanating from the highest levels of the CCP repeatedly stress that development, and what they consider as development is this capital construction, is, quote, the key to solving the problems concerning ethnic groups. And you know what those problems are. But can economic development outrun social instability, as these statements imply? So, some of the previous literature. The interethnic conflict of 2008-2009 in Xinjiang and Tibet, respectively, prompted a number of studies that put forward explanations as to why rapid economic growth has failed to ease, or even in some cases exacerbated, interethnic tensions. Debashish Chowdhury, for example, draws on Ted Gurr's idea of relative deprivation to explain the Uyghur unrest. Relative deprivation is a gap which is felt as unacceptable by the people who are being deprived between a person or group's actual economic conditions and their expectations. That's one. Another one is Zhu and Blatchford in 2012 focused on effects of the market economy in Xinjiang and Tibet, and they adopt a concept of social exclusion as an analytical framework. They find that the clearest winners of marketisation over the first decade of the 21st century have been Han people, and the clearest losers have been ethnic minorities, Uyghurs and Tibetans. They conclude that this is a, quote, inevitable consequence of the market economy because ethnic minority people have, quote, lower levels of skills, education and Mandarin language ability. So therefore they're ill-equipped to compete in this new, apparently, market economy. But they're focused on the higher relative importance of education and skills in a market economy. It ignores more important socio-cultural factors. For entrepreneurs operating in the lucrative and crowded fragment of Xinjiang's political economy, which I'm describing, or will describe here, forming and maintaining instrumental and effective ties, in other words, guanxi, with Han officials is one of the primary skills required. Therefore, ethnicity is a far more important factor of success than is education. It's much harder to form an effective tie with a Han official if you're a Uyghur. For example, I was talking with a businessman who sells expensive medical equipment to government hospitals, and he needs only to make 2 sales in a whole year to be doing well. When I asked what his work involved specifically, his friend, who's a farmer and also about the same age, in his early 20s, interjected, his job is making guanxi with government officials. The businessman then followed up with, quote, much of how I do business I can't really tell you about, i.e. it's a little bit shady. And both of these young men asserted that they had fooled around in school, they didn't have good grades. 我们学习不好. Later, discussing how to create new business opportunities, the businessman insisted, quote, that the first step is to get your guanxi worked out here, i.e. in Kuala where I work, then go to Beijing to find an appropriate opportunity. Where's the new policy coming from? Where's the new subsidy? Another set of scholars, Bruel and Ahmad, note that, quote, budgetary spending on capital construction under the Great Western Development Plan, which began in 2000, sort of a precursor to the Cis Xinjiang program, appears not to have been focused sufficiently on growth-promoting activities. Instead, they say this money was spent on ostentatious office buildings and urban beautification projects. For example, see that picture of the Olympic torch that I just showed you. It's 25 metres high. It's in a completely artificial river. It has gas coming out of it that's from the Tarim oil and gas fields. It's very much a beautification states project. These are mechanisms by which local cadres create and maintain clientelist networks and improve their chances for promotion by increasing the profile and GDP of their region. Ben Hillman will talk about this stuff in more detail. Now, on social exclusion, the physical absence of Uyghurs in certain parts of Xinjiang or certain occupations is notable. But it's the invisibility of Uyghurs in places where they're not absent that is, in my view, much more striking. Over 3 years of living in Han communities in Xinjiang, I observed that the Han attitude to Uyghurs is one of ignoring, even when they're sitting on the street, straight past. The concepts of ignoring and excluding overlap considerably in the material world. Ignoring is expressed economically in the way that Han people disperse and exchange resources almost exclusively within the Han community. But the way that ignoring is expressed socially is more subtle and possibly more hurtful. Most of the many Han people that I know rarely interact with or talk to Uyghurs, let alone associate with them. They will avoid looking at Uyghurs on the street and generally seek to quickly end any verbal interaction. Taken to an extreme, many Han in Xinjiang treat Uyghurs as invisible. I suggest that this feeling of being ignored is an underlying grievance that can be brought to life by institutionalised forms of discrimination and suppression. This seeming desire on the part of the Han populace to disengage entirely from Uyghurs coexists with the state-driven push to engage on particular terms. To explain interethnic tension in contemporary Xinjiang, these particular terms of involvement, engagement, is inclusion, are as important as social exclusion. Uyghurs are central to the Han imagination of Xinjiang. They're included as the socio-cultural other, and they're the essential justification for the perception of instability. And they thus perform an important political discursive role in unifying Han within Xinjiang and across the PRC. In the process of convergence, the Han expectation that Uyghurs are instability producing, the very existence of Uyghurs is instability producing, helps to make them that way. Furthermore, the existence of Uyghurs and the related perception of instability is what drives the massive capital investment that I'm talking about today. This is Xinjiang. If you have those people, if you don't have those people, then that money wouldn't be coming in. So Uyghurs are thus a primary asset of institutional Xinjiang. The Bingtuan and the local governments, they depend on Uyghurs for their livelihood in a sense because that's where the money is coming from. You know, the fact that the Uyghurs are there. So now let's look at the political and economic context and for a look at what makes lucrative chaos. Big context. Across China, the perceived importance of high economic growth to maintain social stability prompts large-scale government intervention in the form of aggressive fiscal stimulus followed by tightening to control inflation. See the global financial crisis and the response to that. Big cycles ensue, with the economy slewing back and forth between growth and this threat of an apparently destabilising slowdown. Stimulus plans, like the Cis Xinjiang, make corruption even more lucrative, or like the Great Western Development Plan. And then selective fiscal tightening, that is, controlling bank lending, for example, chokes competition to the people who don't have the good guarantee with the banks. And that further concentrates political and economic power in the hands of government officials and their close business associates. This nationwide political economy is taken to an extreme in Xinjiang. Like many things in China, Xinjiang is an extreme version of it. The large capital injections associated with economic stimulus have a direct effect on inflation. So the nationwide fiscal tightening that began in 2010 across China did not reduce inflation in Xinjiang over 2012. Unlike the rest of China, official figures on Xinjiang state that inflation actually increased over 2012. Inflation, my own research has shown that inflation in urban Xinjiang for food and housing can be put at between 25 and 30% per annum. So over 3 years, that means that the price of food is doubled, 30% times, cumulatively times 3. High levels of inflation are one of the underlying causes of social unrest among Han and Uyghurs. And for this reason, inflation makes the central government extremely uneasy. The central government is definitely not just concerned with social unrest among Uyghurs in Xinjiang. They're also concerned with social unrest among Han. The central government's response to this is to reduce liquidity and therefore try to control inflation by first reining in bank lending. And then entrepreneurs and farmers in Xinjiang who depend on credit must turn to the private lenders or to the shadow banking industry. To illustrate how shadow banking can operate, I'll quote from a Wenzhou venture capitalist. You know what Wenzhou is? It's in eastern China. It's a big centre of entrepreneurialism in China. Quote, "What we do is we put money into banks and we let the banks lend to companies. If they repay the loan on time, that's fine. But if they don't, we acquire them. We target companies that are about to go bankrupt but still have a good economic foundation. We like firms to run out of that money so they become ours." Officially, part of Assist Xinjiang is making loans available to small entrepreneurs, but a budding entrepreneur, a friend of mine, explained that capital is no easier to come by than 3 or 4 years ago. He said, "Ordinary people must go through a lengthy process, and not even then the loan will be necessarily approved. Certainly not quickly, they may wait 2 or 3 months, by which time the business opportunity that they want the loan for has already passed. In other words, these business opportunities are very time-based, they're speculative." Even stronger testimony to the difficulty of borrowing money is the ubiquity of private money lenders who charge extremely high interest rates. If bank credit was widely accessible, these businesses couldn't operate because they're charging so much more. Every non-retail entrepreneur that I spoke to in January this year for 3.5 weeks in Xinjiang was directly involved in high interest money lending or borrowing. Anyone who needs a loan, and many people do, most people do, who run businesses or are farmers, but cannot get one through the formal banking system, must consider the opportunity cost of not having capital against the high cost of borrowing that capital through the shadow banking system at rates of 30 or 40% per annum. And that's the sort of low end. The risk of losing everything is clearly increased. Now, the people who flourish within this particular fragmented economy, or the fragment of the economy, are the ones who recognise opportunities and threats, and have social networks and economic capital to respond in a way that benefits them. The business opportunities that present in South Xinjiang are direct functions of the central government's spending on capital infrastructure, on the subsequent inflation, and on the restrictions on bank lending. A Han entrepreneur who lives in a small rural county in South Xinjiang described his most recent business deals to me in January this year. This is a long quote. "I had capital of 400,000 yuan from selling my former business, so I bought 2 cranes, things to pick up stuff and move it over. 25 tons, big, really big ones. Why did I want to buy these? At that time, they were building the second rail line, and they were building the expressway that we use today. I saw a very good business opportunity. So I got these 2 cranes, and I leased them to the construction contractors for 2 years. I knew that they'd need these cranes because the scale is very large. They certainly would not have enough cranes. I was willing to bet on that. I understood the situation. In 2008, 2009, the central government was investing to stimulate internal demand. The whole country was building railways. So I did cranes for 2 years. Two years of cranes gave me a pure profit of 1 million yuan. That's about, I can't work it out in euros. It's 160,000 Australian dollars. which is easy, I'm sure, for you. So I did cranes for, after I sold the cranes, I looked at the national policies to print more renminbi. Putting money in the bank is no good. It would lose value. I needed to change my money into real things because the price of real things was going up and my money would only be worth half as much in terms of real things in a few years' time. I took out all my money immediately and I invested in land and 2 small commercial properties. I bought a 30-year lease on 100 mul, which is 16 acres, of orchard land for 500,000 yuan. And I recently leased it out to a farmer for 15 years. I calculated it carefully. I can manage it myself and earn about 200,000 yuan per year, but I don't have the expertise or the time. The farmer will pay me 100,000 yuan per year for the first 5 years, 120,000 a year for the second 5 years, and 150,000 a year for the next 5 years. Thinking of 5-year plans, so. When the lease is up in 2028, I can probably sell the land for about 2 million yuan. This, I'll get back to that. The crane example, this is me speaking now. The crane example demonstrates the importance of connections, guanxi, and capital combined with local knowledge and a broad contextual outlook, the knowledge of basically what the government's roughly doing, the central government. I didn't press him further on how he could be so sure that the contractors would want to rent his cranes. So how much of his insight was entrepreneurial flair and how much of it was connections is impossible to tell. But we can be sure that only connections is crucial to the deal. The high visibility of the construction project and the staggering profit figures were a total of 115% per year on the initial investment of 600,000 yuan. That's each crane 600,000 yuan. Strongly implied this was an opportunity that was both exclusive and not entirely above board. At the same time, capital is so scarce for some people that they'll agree to schemes like the orchard example. The narrator of the above story expects to recoup his capital in only the first 5-year plan, and all of the risk and hard work is shouldered by the farmer lessee. If water runs out, if some other natural disaster happens. If long-term bank credit was easier to get, the farmer would not need to lease the land at this very high rate, because they can buy it outright themselves, and if they couldn't pay it off in 5 years, they can certainly pay it off in 10 years. In addition, speculation, land development, and investment by non-agriculturalists, often from somewhere outside of Xinjiang, is pushing up the cost of land and thus the risk of farming it in Uyghur-dominated rural South Xinjiang. Business has been so good in the last few years for people with capital and connections that many ranking officials have quit their secure state jobs to become full-time entrepreneurs. Among my own contacts, those who've jumped into the sea in this way include a police commander, the head of a Kola City government bureau, and the deputy head of the best Bingtuan regiment in the region. And if you have a high position in the Bingtuan, you have guanxi is even more important in the government system. So that says something about how much more you can make by being a free agent, if you've got the resources. A small-time entrepreneur noted that if you have the resources, you can do business better and better. The criteria that he was using for good business was a quick buck. It has to be a quick buck because there's no certainty to be found in the political, legal, or economic structures. Even as many people in Xinjiang perceive the state as a predator, they think the state's out to get their money, and it's quite true, it is. Most also relate to the state as a provider of opportunities and the ultimate decider of destinies. That which giveth and that which taketh away. The medical equipment businessman, on that same interview, gestured to his farmer friend and said, he and I both await opportunities, when he was talking about what he does. He and I both await opportunities. The businessman waits for a government procurement order to be announced, or to be announced to him before it gets announced to the public. Then makes a bid in a tender process or Dutch auction to supply the required machinery. The farmer waits for government agricultural sector policies that promote certain techniques or crops, or for opportunities to buy the usage rights for large areas of marginal rural land that it can develop into better producing land and then on-sell. At the very least, knowledge of impending policy changes comes from these close connections with relevant government officials. In other words, most significant threats and opportunities arise out of state action or inaction. Reading the market means reading the state. Uyghurs are ill-positioned to read the state in this way, but they're not unaffected by the changes in Xinjiang's economic structure. They're largely excluded from the lucrative, but very much included in the chaos. The lack of access that Uyghurs in general have to the lucrative, chaotic political economy of the Han entrepreneurs is important because it demonstrates, in effect, that you Uyghurs cannot be like us Han. You can never do what we do. But at the same time, the implicit promise of Han-style cultural and economic modernisation appears to be that you only have to be like us in order to enjoy what we enjoy. And Uyghurs could thus make a legitimate complaint that you won't let us be like you and you won't let us be like us. In other words, Uyghurs are likely to feel they have very little living space left, and that not only do they have nothing, they also owe a great deal. State-linked discourses repeatedly emphasise what the CCP and the Han have done for the ethnic minorities and minority areas. This is a discourse of minority indebtedness. The whole premise of Assist Xinjiang is indebtedness. The indebtedness is both financial and moral, and the debtors and creditors are specifically identified. Xinjiang is in debt to Nadi. Xinjiang people, both Han and Uyghur, are collectively indebted to their Nadi compatriots. Of course, it's not stated like that. Assist Xinjiang is posed as an act of selfless giving by the more developed Chinese people of the East to the poorer and more backward Chinese people of the West. The gift is simultaneously an act of inclusiveness and of differentiation. But a gift is a debt, and both work in similar ways to tie the giver and the receiver together. And Assist Xinjiang is just one aspect of a series of ongoing exchanges of people, minerals, money, even ideas between Xinjiang and Nadi. People in Xinjiang cannot but be aware of the tightening of this web of indebtedness or inclusion. Han people in Xinjiang, however, can shrug off the largesse, if you like, of the central government as a stability measure. They do not feel burdened by the implied debt because they know that they're also stability measures themselves. They're doing their part. Indeed, they're in some small but important way part of the gift. Uyghurs, on the other hand, are always being told that they're the cause of instability. Their very presence is debt creating. Receiving a gift that's overvalued by the giver, especially if it's a gift that you don't want in the first place, is an uncomfortable feeling. The useless gift puts one in debt for an unreasonable sum to a creditor that's seen from the outset as a burden. Go back to David Graeber. He writes this: tell people they're inferior, they're unlikely to be pleased. But this surprisingly rarely leads to armed revolt. Tell people that they're potential equals who have failed. This is a form of social inclusion. You're equal to me, but you failed. And that, therefore, even what they do have, they do not deserve. That isn't rightly theirs, and you're much more likely to inspire rage. For thousands of years, the struggle between rich and poor has largely taken the form of conflicts between creditors and debtors. That's the end of his quote. In Xinjiang in the early 2010s, the gift of Han-style cultural and economic normalisation manifests as an unquantifiable, by definition, unrepayable moral debt. Sporadic examples of violence involving Uyghur people in rural areas of South Xinjiang, or in Tiananmen Square for that matter, can be viewed from this perspective as a rejection of the normalising project and its manifestations in Xinjiang, a destruction of the debt records. Thank you.